very good afternoon to you and welcome to Just Africa. Water, they said, is life. Yet, across the continent of water, access to safe, affordable and reliable water remains one of the continent's most urgent development and challenges. As governments grapple with rising demand, aging infrastructure and limited public financing, global corporations and private investors have increasingly turned their attention to Africa's water systems. Proponents of water privatization argue that the private investment being efficiency, technology and accountability, but critics insist that water, a fundamental human right, should never be treated as a commodity for profit. The fight against water privatization for Africa's future examines the growing continental debate. Should Africa's water systems be publicly owned and managed, or should they be open to private operators and global corporations? The outcome of this struggle will determine and only who controls access to water, but also the social, economic, and environmental future of millions of Africans. Welcome once again to Just Africa. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Oyinpere Krumade. Hello, Mivi.
Yeah, good afternoon, Priye.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Lagos, Nigeria, and to you from wherever you watch from across the globe. And welcome to Just Africa. Yeah, we were talking about water privatization.
Yeah, should it be privatized? Looks like there's a question out there. Should water be privatized? Should the ownership be publicly owned? And why should it be privatized? There's a report that says that over 700 million people in Africa does not have access to adequate, clean, pipe-borne water. Yeah. And though there's another argument that actually challenges that perspective, if that argument or those, perspectives were true.
Now, I think to answer that question really is to ask another question. Is water not already privatized in Nigeria? Maybe in some parts of Nigeria. Because most people own their private source of water. Some places who cannot drill their own borehole, who do not have access to public water, what do? They hire the services of tankers. They call the ones we call Malam or Aboki to come and supply them water. So what do we call that really? Is that maybe not a formalized privatization, but to a large extent, that is a form of privatization. So some places, many Nigerians don't have access to water. They do it by themselves. Whatever they know they can do is what they do. But whether the issue of privatization should take a formal structure, that is the conversation. And if we really want to talk about it, water is a natural resource. Water is supposed to be as free as the air we breathe. So if we are saying that, okay, right now we want to privatize water, is like saying we want to make sure we sell water just the way soda is sold. Is that how it is actually meant to be? And if we go back to records, if we go back to the records of Ghana, South Africa, and most African countries, you will see that at one point or the other, they've actually gone into privatization of water. Okay. And what happened? You now see that some of these organizations, the firms that are running the water supply, they focus on the part of the country where the elites or the urban area where they feel that, yes, they can make more sense. Because the moment you privatize it, it becomes a profit-making venture. The people who are into this, they want to make profit out of it. How about the communities, the people who cannot afford the bills of water? What happens to them? They will be cut off. So what would they drink? How would they run their businesses? How would they live their daily lives? So you see, the issue of privatization, as much as it has its positive angle to it, the negative effect is alarming.
But if we look at it very well, excuse me, even if the government, through the ministry, maybe of Water Corporation, maybe through the relevant ministry, departments and agencies, whether in Kenya, in South Africa, or in Nigeria, as case may be, water is going to come as as an item which is very, very essential for our existence, but yet, even if the government is involved 100%, you're still going to pay for water. So in that sense, water is not totally or completely free. The question begging for answer is this: if many African countries, if they've been able, if by virtue of institutional involvement or government participation have been able to make water available to all in these communities, whether in the rural areas or in the urban areas, and if they've been able to, just a moment, if they've been able to do that to a specific, if they've been able to do that or to meet part of the public, to meet part of the people, part of the population, to meet the needs, the water needs of part of the population, if that is consistent and if it is actually adequate.
Okay. Do we have water corporation in Nigeria? Yes. We still have the office existing. We still have staff who go there to work. The government still pay those people salaries at the end of each month. When last did you get water supply?
I have water supply. I have water.
From the government? Is it a public water or the one that was dug
by a
private?
When you rent an apartment, one of the things that comes with it is that you stay in an apartment. There's provision of pipe-borne water. I can understand the fact that not everyone have access to pipe-borne water. But there's a provision of pipe-borne water, and your pipes, the pipes that have been laid to your apartment needs to be working and needs to be functioning.
Yes.
Now, there's another case that will beg the answer: who laid those pipes? Whether it's the government or the private organization. And all these are contributing factors to making water available. But if the involvement of the government had, exposed the lack of political will, if the involvement of the government has not completely overhauled the whole system for us to have efficient, sufficient, and adequate provision of pipe-borne water, do we allow private investors come into this space? And when private investors come into this space, there are lots of things that will be attributed to the involvement, the operations of the private individuals.
Yes.
Now, is that going to work for the people or work against the people? And I think from the way we are going to handle this, or from the reason why this topic was actually picked for our conversation, is because there are interests vying for private investment in, and for private individuals to come in to play in the sector. And there are other interests saying no, private investment should stay away.
Yes, this week is the week for our Water, Our Rights campaign going on this week.
So now, driven by civil society organizations.
Civil society organizations. So they are of the opinion that water shouldn't be privatized. The reason is clear to them. The reason is because they feel that I don't like calling them the poor, but the ones that they feel that will not be able to afford the bills for water will definitely have no access to good water, to clean water. Even right now, as it stands, you will still agree with me that there are communities in Nigeria, in Africa, that do not have single, like, whether you want to call it government pipe-borne water or individual, they don't have anyone. When you watch certain documentaries, you still see people, they carry buckets, basins, whatever, to some villages, far distances, go to the river and to get water just for them to be able to use. So if the problem is there, we know. But just as you rightly ask, the individuals that are coming in, will they be able to solve those problems? Again, the climate change is also affecting our rivers right now. The climate change is drying up our lakes, our rivers, and the rest. So, which is also causing dry dryness in our sources of water. So the question is, these private organizations that are coming, are they going to do something about the rivers that are drying? Are they going to do something about the climate change? So it is not just saying that, okay, we want to come in, we employ people, the government is going to make money out of this, the people are going to get, no. Is it realistic that, yes, they are going to solve water problem in Africa? Because, like I said, while we're preparing for the show, I went back to history, if time allows me. Okay, for instance, look at South Africa in back in the 1990s. They went into a 30 years concession with Bywater, a British firm, to manage its water supply. What happened? Nothing came out of it. They had to cut, they stopped it. And what happened? In fact, before they even had to end the agreement, there was a protest. Because they felt, the people felt that they were paying more attention to the rich than to the less privileged. So that was in South Africa back in the 90s. Ghana, it happened too. That the same thing, protest came. So if they are still fighting up until now, that they still want to privatize with history, having it that they have failed in time past, then I don't know what the push is really all about.
Okay, now let's intimate our viewers more about this conversation before we bring in our guests. And normally I like to title this part of the program, the meaning of what we are talking about, the program. Now, let me take you to the meaning of what we are conversing about. The fight against privatization of Africa's future refers to ongoing continental and global resistance to transferring ownership, management, or control of public water resources from government and communities of public water resources and to private companies. It also highlights the broader struggle over whether water should remain a public good or a government by justice and principles, or become a commercial commodity managed by profit-driven entities. Moving on, the fight encapsulates advocacy efforts by society, and local communities, and global organizations, and corporate control of water utilities, pricing, and affordability, and equitable access to clean water. The continent is looking at that. You know what, we already have information that our guest is standing by, so let's go on this brief break. When we return, we introduce our guest and we jump into the conversation. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Many thanks for joining us on the program. Now, before we jump into the program, let me bring you who are we speaking with today? Is Neil Gupta. He's the Water Campaign Director at Corporate Accountability, a global non-profit advocating for corporate accountability and human rights in essential services such as water, food, and climate. Based in the United States, Mr. Gupta has led international campaigns challenging the influence of multinational corporations and public utilities. With over 15 years of experience in advocacy, research, and global coalition building, he has collaborated with African civil society organizations to expose and resist water privatization efforts. His work emphasizes empowering local communities to reclaim public control of essential services and ensuring that government prioritize people over profit. Mr. Gupta, Neil Gupta, welcome to Just Africa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to be here.
Great, Neil Gupta. I was reading your profile and I realized that you had collaborations with civil society organizations in African countries all around the continent who are fighting against the privatization of water, which they consider as one of the most essential things in the world that Africans should have and not pay through their noses to get. But people out there who are, I don't want to call the naysayers, but who are critics of your stance, we want to ask that there is a report, like I said earlier on in the beginning of the program, that over 700 million Africans do not have access to clean, pipe-borne and adequate water. And if we allow private individuals to come play in this space, maybe that problem will be solved. But it doesn't look like you go with that assertion and with that perspective, or do you?
Absolutely. I think I would say to just look at the facts, look at the reality on the ground, right? As you noted, there is a intensely widespread water crisis, not only on the African continent, but around the world. And that's what happens when we don't prioritize the investment in our water systems that they require. And to those who might promote privatization or say that that's the solution, the silver bullet to addressing this crisis, the reality speaks a very different picture. The countries across the world that have the highest rates of safe water access have achieved that through public investment, public ownership, and public management of their water systems, rather than privatization schemes. And in fact, privatization, if you look, whether it's here in the United States, in Europe, where it really got its start, or across the global South, African countries, Latin American countries, has been an abject failure. And that's why, you know, there are hundreds of cities across the world that have taken back control of their water systems following privatization schemes. So I would say that the reality paints a very different picture, that privatization simply isn't the solution to what we need to get out of this water crisis.
Okay, thank you very much. Now that you said privatization doesn't seem like the best route for us to correct this anomaly, what's the best route? How can both the private and the public sector, that means the government, come together to ameliorate this? And like I said during the program, not to put profit, but put people as a priority.
Absolutely. Well, I would say, first of all, that the private sector is mandated to maximize profits for its shareholders, right? And that is fundamentally at odds with what we need to actually improve our essential services like water, like education, like healthcare. And so I would say, first, governments need to fully reject this false solution of privatization, because the interests of these multinational corporations will always be at odds with the needs of communities, especially poor communities who need the most investment but may not be able to pay the exorbitant rates that the private sector might charge. I would say investment, public investment, needs to be prioritized and increased, and we can achieve that through progressive taxation that ensures that the wealthy pay their fair share. We also need to ensure meaningful community accountability in water governance, especially for those that are most directly impacted. You know, women and girls being primarily responsible for fetching water for their families. Those in rural communities who are often left out in water governance. These are the people that we need to be bringing together to ensure that the water systems are meeting their needs. And we also need to hold the corporations that are, one, privatizing water, but also those that are polluting and otherwise exploiting our water systems. Major extractive industries, the mining industry, the oil industry, they need to be held accountable for their harms, both to people and the environments that we rely on to receive our water.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much, Neil. Okay, so your work is deeply rooted on human rights. You believe that the principle, as far as water is concerned, should be the rights of the people. Now, how do you engage corporate organizations? How do you engage them and pass this message to them so they do not go as far as privatizing water and making it a business venture?
Well, as I said, corporations at the end of the day will always act in their own self-interest and in the interest of their shareholders. Wealthy shareholders, often based in countries like the United States or in European countries. And so, really engaging with them to try to convince them to do the right thing is not necessarily a winning battle, let's say. And so what I would suggest instead is to really work with governments, with public officials whose job is to act in the benefit of the wider population, and really to hold those decision makers accountable to the communities they serve. Because at the end of the day, a corporation is never going to do anything that affects its bottom line, its profit, in a negative way. It'll do everything in its power to increase that profit, regardless of its impact on communities, on the environment, on the state that gave it its contract to begin with. And so I would say really that we need to be engaging and holding our public officials, our government officials accountable, rather than hoping that we can engage with corporations to do the right thing when they're simply proven time and again to not be interested in.
All right, thank you very much. So from your work in Flint to Lagos, Nigeria, what are the tactics that transnational corporations use in gaining influence over public water system?
That's a great question. I would say that at its core, the water privatization industry is a disaster capitalism industry, right? It thrives on water crises and really sees our need for water universally as a money-making opportunity. And I think that the main thing that connects Flint, Lagos, and really every corner of the world is that we all have a fundamental human right to safe water. And that's regardless of your nationality or how much money you have. But as I said, this multi-billion-dollar industry sees our need for water as a profit-making opportunity. And the same corporations that are trying to take control of water systems in Lagos and really across the African continent are those that we're up against here in the United States. In fact, the world's largest private water corporation, Veolia, played a really significant role in the now infamous Flint water crisis, which is still affecting tens of thousands of people today. And Veolia has actually been exposed for its efforts to secure multi-million-dollar deals that would lock Lagos into water privatization schemes for decades. And I think that the fact that they haven't been able to secure those types of contracts are really a testament to the power of community members resisting this power grab.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil Gupta. First of all, I like the job you're doing, because it's good for Africans, it's good for everybody out there, and it's good to see people like you on the other side doing, making sure that at least Africans, in collaboration with some Africans, to make sure that we get this and we get it right. Now, you mentioned the intervention or the position, what the government, civil society, or the civil government, what they are supposed to do to make this available. But it looks like it's a very, very huge capital-intensive project with so many other projects that the government in Africa, in different countries, be it in Lagos, Nigeria, be it in Kenya, in South Africa, with so many public capital-intensive project that they have to be involved with when it comes to water. They have lakes, and for building, having the Federal Ministry of Water Corporation, and how to make sure that this water are channeled to where people live and to charge, to build the people. It's quite difficult. It looks like Africa does not have that technology or that capacity at the moment in time. For example, in places like Canada, their water that they use, when you pay for your monthly rent in the building, you are directly paying for power, you're paying for water, you're paying for the internet, and you're paying for other facilities. It's not like that in Africa, and it's going to take a long time for the government to be able to streamline things. What sort of advice do you have for the African continent concerning infrastructural development and making sure that all these requirements are put into place?
Yeah, so I think exactly like you said, every community faces different opportunities and challenges. And I think that that's precisely why maintaining public local control of water is so essential. A multinational corporation coming in and trying to apply a kind of one size fits all approach has shown to fail and actually not meet the needs of communities. And so, what I would say is that investment in public water systems is arguably among the highest priorities that a government should hold. That is an obligation to meeting everybody's human right to water. It's also essential to meeting the moment as we confront this climate crisis, and especially on the African continent, where the climate crisis is, the effects of it are bound to be most acute. And simply put, the short term profit incentives of the private sector, a corporation, are incompatible with the long term planning and investment that are needed, and that the climate crisis really requires. To put it simply, a private water executive whose primary concern is, whether he's going to get his monthly bonus next month, shouldn't be the guy in charge of making decisions that affect, an entire community's water system for, next year, next decade, and beyond. And so I really think that it comes down to us collectively prioritizing water and fulfilling people's human right to water. There's always this question of where's the money going to come from, but there's almost never that same discussion of where's that money going to come from for weapons and war, for tax breaks to billionaires and corporations. There's never that question, and it really comes down to what we prioritize as a society, where we put our money and where we put our attention.
Okay, great. You just mentioned something very, very significant, very, very significant rather, and that's where the fund is going to come from, because we're looking at, investment in Africa public water system is currently insufficient with an estimated $30 billion per year gap, $30 billion. So if we are looking at how much we currently have that has been invested in the continent is less than $20 billion. And I bet to say it's even less than $15 billion, and that's quite insufficient. So if we look at funding, and we are going to give priority. Now, do remember that most of these multinational organizations that you would not want to come into the system because they're going to privatize it, are some of them that they participate in different industries, and at the same time, they've transferred technology in that same industry to the locals. In some countries in Africa who have, as they move on, develop that technology to be able to produce a domestic technology to sustain that industry. Don't you think this can be replicated in the water industry?
There's no question that we need a robust amount of investment, as you said. It's in the tens of billions of dollars. But I guess what I would say is that at the end of the day, the private sector isn't doing anything out of the goodness of its heart, right? These corporations aren't, donating technology to governments in Africa or Latin America or even the United States. They expect a high rate of return. And in fact, there's been this large debate on private finance versus public finance and how do we kind of leverage the money there. But the numbers really show that private finance sometimes can cost double what public finance can cost. So the actual money that goes in to a water system from private finance sources actually costs nearly double. And I think one great example, unfortunately great example I should say, here in the United States is that there was a community in a state, the state of New Jersey, that was facing budgetary issues, had problems investing in its water, and a major multinational private water corporation came in and said, here, we're going to give you this money up front. We're going to prevent there from being rate increases, tariff increases, and we're gonna, fix everything, right? There are all these lofty promises, and the reality again showed a very different picture where the corporation, of course, demands a certain amount of money back and profit for its shareholders. And so what we saw is effectively immediate rate increases that really threatened those that were already struggling to pay for their water, already struggling to make ends meet in other aspects of their life. And what that led to was people having liens, tax liens placed on their homes because they couldn't pay for water. So just imagine that for a second, right? The human impact where people are at risk of losing their homes so that a corporation can make its profit that much more lucrative for its shareholders, it's just unconscionable. And so when we really think about this public versus private, we really have to keep our values of ensuring universal access to water, regardless of your ability to pay, really at the heart of it, because there's no alternative to water. You need it to survive. Your neighbor needs it to survive, and that's what we really need to keep in mind as we make these decisions.
All right, thank you very much. So I want to ask again, in 2010, the UN declared water as human right. So the question right now is, what's in reality, what amount of power does the UN have when financial and political powers, when they go against this declaration? What power does the UN have to call this cooperation to orders?
That's a great question, and I think there's no doubt that compared to international financial institutions like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, the UN's kind of hard power in this respect is somewhat limited, right? However, I do think that the UN has an ability to convene people, and the recognition of the human right to water, as you said, in 2010, was a major milestone. It's something really the UN was recognizing so many of us already understood to be the case. But I think that another really important aspect that the UN holds is the ability to prioritize and emphasize human rights. For example, the United Nations has what's called a special rapporteur, which is effectively an independent expert that focuses on different aspects of human rights, be it the right to education, the right to health care, and in this case, the right to safe drinking water and sanitation. And the special rapporteur has the ability to travel to different countries around the world and document the different ways that the human right to water is being fulfilled or being violated, and that includes from corporate actors. And so I think that the ability for the UN to uplift that kind of research and provide an authoritative, so to speak, source for the reality on the ground is an immense power that I think the UN and other international institutions really have a responsibility to lean into and focus on the needs of people and communities rather than the needs of the wealthy few.
All right, thank you once more, Neil. Now, many people or some persons argue that the number of persons that will be taken off the labor market when water is privatized is also one of the key factors individual corporation comes to think of privatizing water. Some feel that the amount of money that the government will be able to generate in tax will go a long way in solving some problems when it comes to water issues. Do you agree with that? Do you feel that because of what the government will be able to generate, because of what the people that will be able to be gainfully employed in those firms, do you think those reasons are genuine enough for privatization of water in Africa and the world generally?
Unfortunately, I would say I don't agree with that because privatization often is followed by mass layoffs, mass labor violations that ultimately affect working people. And that's a big reason why trade unions are some of the biggest opponents of water privatization and privatization of other essential services. And, I think that as it comes to, the tax revenue that comes potentially from corporate water schemes, I think, again, unfortunately, probably sound like a broken record, but that the reality is a very different picture where there's actually, growing evidence of, the tax evasion of major corporations. I know in Senegal, for example, there are major allegations of tax evasion by the multinationals that have privatized the water system there and actually funneling money from the Senegalese people to French shareholders in this case. And so I think that, privatization costs the state more in the long run, comes at a major risk to workers, not only in their jobs, but with drastically reduced headcounts. Workers are put under unsustainable working conditions that are frankly dangerous, and they oftentimes lose their union benefits, which are hard fought and hard won. And then, of course, at the end of the day, those workers aren't just workers; they're part of these communities, and so we all kind of share in the negative impacts of privatization, but in the potential real opportunities and benefits of a robust public water system that serves everyone.
Great. Now, Mr. Neil Gupta, we will go on a break. Please don't go anywhere yet. We'll be back shortly, and Just Africa continues. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Many thanks for joining us on the program. We've been talking about the fight against water privatization for Africa's future. Our conversation this afternoon had been with Neil Gupta. He's a water campaign director at Corporate Accountability, a global non-profit advocating for corporate accountability and human rights in essential services such as water, food, and climate. Welcome once again to the program, Mr. Neil Gupta.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Great. It's good to have you. Now, let's have this conversation. In order for us not to go full privatization, and for us to, let's manage the public privatization with the public-private partnership for the government to be able to deliver water. Apart from that, do you have a policy direction that your organization, by virtue of what you do, you must have influenced some form of public decision with the United Nations because it is one of the social development goals, number 6. What sort of policy direction can you suggest to governments across Africa in order for us not to go the direction of full privatization?
Yeah, so I would say that, of course, as you said, full privatization, the private ownership of a water system is extremely dangerous. I would also say, though, that the kind of spectrum between full public control and ownership and full private ownership is pretty vast and includes, as you suggested, private management of water systems, private operations. And those ultimately are also forms of privatization. Now, some may try to argue that they're not because the public still owns the system. But I would argue, and many would argue, what is the value of ownership if you're not in control of the water system? And at the end of the day, these so-called public-private partnerships are about private control, corporate control of our water. And so I would say that the best kind of ways to manage water from a policy perspective are, again, ensuring that there is public investment that is funded through progressive taxation on the wealthy and corporations first. Second, that there is meaningful community accountability for water governance. And I don't mean town halls where politicians act like they're listening. I mean genuine participatory mechanisms for community members to be involved, of which there are a number of examples globally. There also needs to just be an outright rejection of water privatization, because I think that the challenge with sometimes the years leading up to privatization and sometimes the decades leading into privatization are that it diverts really essential government money energy, and other resources, namely time, towards facilitating privatization when that money could otherwise be spent on investment in the public water system. For example, the World Bank spent around $7 million at least in pushing privatization in Lagos. Now imagine what $7 million could do for improving the system itself. And imagine how much time was lost and is continuing to be lost in this kind of dogmatic pursuit of privatization. So I think that an outright rejection of all forms of corporate control and privatization is essential to any policy to really clear the way for public solutions. And I would say that lastly, communities need to remember that they're not alone. Every community, while distinct and unique, of course, can take lessons from other communities, can pool resources with other, whether it be cities, states, or even countries through public-public partnerships that really emphasize mutual benefit and support rather than profit for one side and cost for the other.
Great. Now, in fact, there's something I need you to interrogate, and that's with regards to the vast availability of water resources in the continent of Africa. If you go to Congo, the Congo Nile has a large water reserve. You go to the Lake Victoria, there's water reserve there, and Niger, the Niger rivers, Zambezi. Even when you come to Nigeria, you go to Tanzania, you go to Tanganyika, you go to Malawi, we have all these resources. But it looks like governments in African countries, if they cannot see the perspective and the potential returns when they are channeling lots of funds into an enterprise, when they don't see that visible, it's just going to be meeting the needs of people in the society. They are not drawn towards that. What sort of strategy can we use to bypass this disposition?
Yeah, I think there's this kind of sad irony in that there is vast amounts of water resources available across the world, but people, still are facing an acute crisis. 1 in 4 people globally don't have water, and as you said, that's in the hundreds of millions on the African continent alone. And I think that the issue here is twofold. One, that oftentimes a country or a community's water resources are prioritized for private or corporate exploitation, whether that be for the mining industry, the major agricultural industry, or other, even water bottling and things like that are major drains on the existing water resources we have. So that is kind of one component of the challenge here that needs to be addressed. The other is that we need to reject this idea that investment in our water systems has a kind of profit return. However, there is an immense societal and even economic return on the investment in public water. For example, a thriving public water system is often the cornerstone of a thriving local economy. It allows local businesses to run, local vendors, of course, local households. Think of the educational benefit that girls receive when they don't have to spend an entire day walking kilometers to go get water for their family, and instead are able to attend school and obtain a formal education. Those benefits, while they might not be, easy to calculate on a bottom line, are far and away more beneficial than siphoning off community money into the bank accounts of foreign shareholders. And so I really think that challenging this idea that water needs to be $1 in, $2 out. It is, $1 in and immense social and economic benefits and environmental benefits out.
All right. Thank you very much for your insight so far. Now, I know that there is so much push against privatization of water, but we are still faced with one reality. The reality is that the water is not or let's say equitable water, drinkable water, the water we need for our daily lives, they are not readily available. Sometimes we need to process this water. So as much as we are fighting against or pushing against privatization of water in our homes, what are the positive alternatives to the availability of water in Africa, in African homes, or in the world generally, as the case may be?
Yes, so I think that, first and foremost, you're right. It's not necessarily the case that, while there is an abundance or a seeming abundance of water resources, that's readily available at the tap for a household. And there's no question that that requires money, that requires time, that requires attention from the public sector. And I would say that the reality of privatization is that it doesn't achieve those ends and it costs more money. But to your point, we still need to address this water crisis. And there are countless communities across the world that have achieved this through public investment, public attention, and public priority. And so I would say that's where really leaning into the public partnership model, where we can take lessons from other cities or states or even countries that have achieved this, or even pooling resources together. In the state I live in here in the United States of Massachusetts, there's a great example of two cities who on their own didn't have enough money to build a water treatment plant that they needed. However, what they realized is if they pooled their money together, the public money together, they could actually build a water plant that served both communities. And so that, led to a public solution to a water challenge that they were facing, and was really a mutual benefit to these two communities who might have otherwise seen themselves as, isolated from each other. And I think that's a great example of kind of community to community solidarity and support that'll really the
Okay,
challenges that we face.
very much. But from your profile, you are a strong advocate. You're advocating against water privatization. You've done so much for Africa and for the United States. So can you share one of your success stories of how your campaign strategies have been able to work against or kick against privatization of water, and how water has really been human rights, really?
Well, first, I would say that by no means have I done this on my own. It's been really in support of and in solidarity with local community activists, across different African countries and here in the United States as well. This truly is a movement rather than isolated individuals or even organizations trying to do the right thing. I would say that some of the most impressive organizing and campaigning for protecting public water and rejecting privatization is actually in Lagos, Nigeria itself, where it's really become one of the kind of global flashpoints for water justice. And I think that's really important for your viewers in Lagos and across Nigeria to hear that the world really looks to Lagos for movement lessons and how they can take what has worked there, where if we rewind the clock, 2013 or 2014, the government, with the World Bank's backing and pressure, you could say, was intent on privatization. They said this will be done within months. There's no political constraints to doing so. And here we are in 2025, and there has still not been privatization, water privatization that's been secured in Lagos. And that is a huge testament to the power of community members, of workers, of women's groups, environmental groups, faith groups, all coming together. And, folks like those in the global north standing in solidarity as well, in combining our efforts and really understanding that our struggle is shared. Even though we might live on other ends of the earth. And so I would say, honestly, that the water campaigning and the movement that's really been built in Lagos is one of the most impressive that I've seen in my time here.
Well, thank you.
All right, so before we let you go, Mr. Neil Gupta, I just want to ask this question. The United Nations Education and Scientific Project they talked about, when it comes to education, they tell you how many % of the national budget is required for the government to invest in education for us to overcome the education deficiency in Africa. When it comes to infrastructural development, United Nations is also telling Africa government that, look, you need to have an investment of over $100 billion annually for you to overcome your infrastructural deficit in your continent. So when it comes to water, what do you think they have put out there for Africa to overcome this water deficiency in their continent? Do you know the figures, or what do you think we should be looking at?
So that's a great question, and it's really, as we've been saying, largely dependent on where, which country you're in, but then also within the country, you know, an urban or peri-urban area is going to require a vastly different type of investment and proportion of investment than a rural area, for example. And so I would say that the figures really vary across not only the continent, but even within countries. But at the heart of it is really that we need to be prioritizing and increasing the budgetary allocation to water systems across the board, and not falling into this trap of, you know, the private sector saying, oh, we need to be more efficient. Often efficiency means reckless cost cutting that endangers public health, worker safety, and entire communities. What we need is investment. We don't need dangerous cost cutting, and I think that's really at the heart of the decisions we have in front of us.
Thank you so much, Neil Gupta, for your time with us today on Just Africa. It's been a delight having conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very much welcome. Neil Gupta is the Water Campaign Director of Corporate Accountability, a global non-profit advocating for corporate accountability and human rights in essential services such as water, food, and climate. Based in the United States, Gupta has led international campaigns challenging the influence of multinational corporations in public utilities. With over 15 years of experience in advocacy, research, and global coalition building, he has also collaborated with African civil society organizations to expose and resist water privatization efforts in the continent of Africa and across the world. Thank you so much for your time with us. It's been great having this conversation with you.
Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And now to our next conversation without waste of time. The topic is Africa's fight against water privatization still, and it refers to the collective efforts of African citizens, civil society organizations, and governments to oppose the transfer of water supply and management from public authorities to private profit-driven companies. This fight reflects a broader debate. Should access to water be governed by public accountability and social equity, or controlled by market forces and corporate interests? At its core, it is a struggle to protect water as a human right, ensuring it remains affordable, accessible, and sustainably managed for all Africans, especially the poor and marginalized. So we'll go on a break. When we return, we'll have another guest who's joining us on this conversation. You don't want to miss this session. We're back in a moment. Stay with us.